The world called him the Golden King of Wall Street, Nathaniel Whitmore, a self-made billionaire whose empire stretched across finance, real estate, and tech investments. Every headline adored him, every magazine cover showcased his pristine suits and chiseled confidence. And standing beside him, glowing in the limelight, was his pregnant wife, Evelyn Whitmore, the darling of New York's elite. To the public, their marriage was the embodiment of perfection. Lavish gala appearances, whispered romantic gestures, and a penthouse towering over Manhattan, it was the kind of life most could only dream of. But behind the gilded facade, a storm was brewing, one that no amount of carefully curated press could contain. Rumors of another woman swirled through exclusive circles, whispers of a mistress whose presence threatened to unravel the carefully constructed fairy tale. No one, not even Evelyn, could have foreseen the explosive moment that would shatter their world. And when Nathaniel's fury boiled over, leading him to do the unthinkable in a public setting, he unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would bring him to his knees. Because while he thought he held all the power, Evelyn had a secret of her own, one that would make sure he lost everything. Nathaniel Whitmore was the embodiment of the American dream. Born in the rough streets of Chicago, he clawed his way to the top through sheer ambition and ruthless determination. By his late 30s, he had built Whitmore Global, an empire spanning investment firms, luxury developments, and high-end tech startups. Every morning, his personal chauffeur would drop him off at a towering skyscraper that bore his name, where employees murmured stories of his brilliance and relentless work ethic. He was always the first to arrive, the last to leave, a man who turned every venture he touched into gold. The media idolized him, not just as a business mogul, but as the devoted husband of Evelyn Whitmore, née Kensington. A socialite with impeccable lineage, she was the daughter of Charles Kensington, a real estate tycoon with generational wealth. Their wedding had been the talk of the decade, an opulent affair held at a private estate in the Hamptons, attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and power brokers from across the world. With her effortless grace and unwavering poise, Evelyn quickly became one of the most beloved figures in high society. Her charity work, funding scholarships, advocating for domestic violence survivors, and championing children's hospitals, only elevated her status. She was admired, respected, and above all, untouchable. When the world learned that Evelyn was expecting, the media erupted with delight. Headlines celebrated the next chapter in their perfect love story. Tabloids scrambled for exclusive interviews, high-end brands prepared luxury baby gifts, and paparazzi staked out Manhattan's elite OB/GYN clinics, desperate for a glimpse of the radiant mother-to-be. But perfection, as Evelyn was beginning to realize, was an illusion. Nathaniel was changing. He was restless, distracted. His late-night meetings stretched longer. His business trips to Paris and London no longer aligned with Whitmore Global's official schedule. Dinners that had once been intimate, stolen moments between them, were now postponed, rescheduled, or worse, forgotten altogether. Evelyn told herself it was just the stress of his ever-growing empire, that the pressure of fatherhood was weighing on him, that their love was strong enough to withstand it. She was wrong, because while she sat at home, cradling their unborn child, Nathaniel was elsewhere, wrapped in the arms of another woman, and soon the world would see him for what he truly was. Evelyn tried to silence the gnawing doubts creeping into her mind. She reminded herself that success had its price. Her father, Charles Kensington, had sacrificed countless hours building his own empire, often prioritizing business over family. Perhaps Nathaniel was no different. His relentless ambition, his insatiable drive, maybe it was simply the burden of being a man who had built his wealth from nothing. And yet, something felt wrong. It was the little things. The way his patience had worn thin. The way his gaze lingered just a second too long on his phone during dinner. The way he brushed off her doctor's appointments, sending his assistant instead, as though she were another obligation he could delegate. She had told herself she was strong enough to handle this pregnancy alone if necessary. But the cold distance between them was undeniable. What Evelyn didn't know was that her billionaire husband was keeping secrets. Whispers floated through the sleek hallways of Whitmore Global. Murmurs of a woman, always elegantly dressed in designer labels, who had been spotted slipping into Nathaniel's office late at night. Employees who had seen her said nothing, too afraid of their powerful boss to spread the gossip beyond hushed conversations in hidden corners. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued her philanthropic work, her hands instinctively cradling the gentle curve of her belly. She still wanted to believe in her husband, in the life they had built together, in the love that had once seemed unshakable. But beneath the dazzling skyline, where their names were etched in glass and steel, fate had already begun weaving a story of betrayal and heartbreak, one that neither of them could escape. The first person to sense trouble was Alyssa Carter, Nathaniel's longtime personal assistant. At 29, she had spent years working by his side, gaining his trust with her sharp instincts and discretion. But lately, she had noticed things that didn't quite add up. Meeting locations that didn't align with corporate schedules, lavish floral arrangements sent to an unfamiliar address, credit card statements showing extravagant dinner charges at five-star restaurants, reservations she had never made. And then there was Evelyn. One afternoon, Alyssa crossed paths with her in the executive lounge. Evelyn, always composed, looked unusually pale, absently rubbing her lower back. Pregnancy was taking its toll, but she wore her usual mask of grace. Alyssa hesitated before approaching. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "how are you feeling?" Evelyn offered a small, tired smile. "Exhausted, but I suppose that's to be expected. The third trimester is no joke." Alyssa nodded, hesitating again. There was something in Evelyn's expression, a quiet plea, a silent question. Did she suspect something? "If you ever need anything," Alyssa said carefully, choosing her words, "I'm here." She didn't dare say more, not in a corporate setting, not when the walls of Whitmore Global had ears. Evelyn's eyes flickered with gratitude. "Thank you, Alyssa. I'll keep that in mind." The tension between them was invisible but suffocating. That evening, Alyssa found Nathaniel in his office, his usually impeccable desk covered in documents, his movements restless. He barely acknowledged her presence as he rifled through paperwork, lost in thought. And for the first time, Alyssa wondered, was he beginning to realize that the walls were closing in? Nathaniel's tie was slightly loosened, and impatience clung to him like a shadow. He barely looked up as Alyssa entered. "There's a red folder on your desk," he said flatly. "Arrange for a courier to deliver it immediately to the Belmere Hotel. Mark it private and confidential." Alyssa blinked. "Sir, did you mean the Whitmore Belmere property in London?" His jaw tightened, his gaze flickering with something unreadable. "No," he said curtly. "The Belmere in Midtown Manhattan." Midtown? That was only a short drive from the office. A courier seemed unnecessary, but she nodded, knowing better than to push for answers. After he left, curiosity gnawed at her. She checked the address carefully. The recipient, Miss Helena Rousseau, a guest staying in a luxury suite at the Belmere. The name wasn't listed in Whitmore Global's vendor database or linked to any known business associate. Alyssa's stomach twisted. She sealed the envelope, but her thoughts spun. Meanwhile, across the city, Evelyn's father, Charles Kensington, harbored concerns of his own. As a shrewd businessman, he had built an empire on instinct and precision. And something about Nathaniel's recent dealings unsettled him. Projects that once required minimal oversight now came wrapped in layers of complicated fine print. Contracts that should have been straightforward were suddenly riddled with last-minute adjustments. It was a pattern Charles had seen before, in men stretched too thin, balancing too many secrets. He had tried to approach the subject subtly during a Kensington Foundation charity dinner. "Nathaniel," he said, resting a firm hand on his son-in-law's shoulder, "I've noticed some aggressive expansions in your portfolio. Are you sure you're not overextending yourself? With the baby on the way, perhaps now is the time to slow down." Nathaniel's smile was forced, his expression betraying the slightest flicker of irritation. "I appreciate the concern, sir, but everything is under control. Just you wait. I'm on the verge of a breakthrough that will take Whitmore Global further than it's ever been." Charles, unconvinced, glanced across the room at Evelyn. She looked poised as always, but there was a distant unease in her eyes, a subtle tension in the way she held herself. He had seen this before, in women who sensed their world was beginning to crack. But how deep did the fractures run? The whispers in Manhattan's elite circles were growing louder. Warning signs swirled around them, ignored by those who should have seen them coming. And in the heart of the city that never slept, a story of deception and betrayal was about to reach a climax so shocking that even New York would pause in disbelief. By midweek, Nathaniel stepped into the private elevator of the Belmere Hotel, his heartbeat drumming in his ears. He rarely made impulsive decisions, but lately, he found himself testing the limits of recklessness. The elevator hummed softly as it carried him to the penthouse suite, where Helena Rousseau was waiting. When she opened the door, she was draped in a deep crimson satin robe, a knowing smile curling on her lips. Her presence was intoxicating, exotic, confident, and utterly untamed. Helena was the kind of woman who existed to tempt men like him, a beautiful distraction wrapped in expensive silk. She claimed to be a French art dealer expanding her clientele in New York, but their relationship had long since veered away from legitimate business. "Darling," she purred, stepping aside to let him in. The penthouse was lavish, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Manhattan skyline, ivory leather furniture bathed in dim golden light, and a faint trace of luxury perfume lingering in the air. Nathaniel shrugged off his coat, his mind tangled in conflicting thoughts. He had canceled 2 meetings at the office to be here, a risk he never would have taken in the past. And yet here he was. While his pregnant wife waited at home, he was standing in another woman's embrace. Helena's allure was undeniable. She had a way of making Nathaniel forget everything, his responsibilities, his marriage, even the unborn child waiting for him at home. "I can't stay long," he murmured, though his fingers lingered at her waist. "But I needed to see you." She let out a sultry, knowing laugh. "I'm flattered. I was beginning to think your wife finally put you on a tighter leash." At the mention of Evelyn, his jaw tightened. "Let's not talk about her," he said, his voice low. Helena raised an amused brow. "Your call." She leaned in, sliding her arms around his neck, her perfume intoxicating. "Anyway, I have a surprise for you." She led him to a side table where a bottle of vintage champagne rested in a silver bucket, beads of condensation clinging to the glass. He recognized the label, a rare, expensive import. "You shouldn't have," he said, smirking as he picked up the bottle. Helena winked. "A toast to our next endeavor. I'll be traveling to Europe soon for an art auction. Perhaps we can turn it into a business trip for Whitmore Global." The implication was clear. It wasn't just about business. It was about more time together. Paris, Rome, wherever she wanted him. Nathaniel hesitated, a flicker of guilt gnawing at the edges of his mind. "We'll see," he muttered, pushing the thought away as he popped the cork. They drank, the golden liquid swirling in their glasses. Helena locked eyes with him, her gaze holding an unspoken promise. In that moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. But unknown to Nathaniel, Helena had her own ambitions. She had spent months subtly prying into his finances, his expansions, his political connections. Power fascinated her, and being with him wasn't just about passion, it was a calculated move toward greater influence. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of herself in the hotel mirror, reminding herself that everything was going according to plan. They spent an hour together before Nathaniel finally left, pressing a lingering kiss to her lips. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, unease crept up his spine. What if someone saw me? But he shoved the thought aside. He was Nathaniel Whitmore, untouchable. Or so he believed. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, a bellhop named Anthony Romano was watching. Anthony had worked the Whitmore Global Charity Gala last year, serving drinks while listening to the elite of Manhattan discuss business and power. He knew exactly who Nathaniel was. And he also knew that Nathaniel Whitmore had no business sneaking out of a hotel suite that wasn't registered under his wife's name. By the time Nathaniel reached the exit, Anthony was already dialing a number. One phone call that would set into motion the downfall of Nathaniel's carefully guarded secret. And when the truth finally came to light, it wouldn't just be Nathaniel who suffered. Helena, Evelyn, and everyone in his orbit were about to be dragged into the storm. The next evening, Evelyn sat in their lavish penthouse, flipping through magazine clippings of nursery designs. She had chosen soft hues of mint green and lavender, colors meant to create a soothing atmosphere for the baby. She had spent weeks preparing, carefully selecting the smallest details, imagining the warmth and love that would fill the space. Nathaniel, however, had barely contributed. Every conversation about the nursery had been met with vague nods or murmurs about work. Now, as she traced a gentle hand over her growing belly, the absence of her husband's involvement stung more than she cared to admit. When he finally walked through the door that night, tension clung to him like an invisible weight, and for the first time, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that her billionaire husband was hiding something from her. Nathaniel walked past the carefully arranged fabric swatches and baby catalogs without so much as a glance. Evelyn's heart clenched. She swallowed her disappointment, forcing herself to approach him gently. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "there's a charity gala next Friday for the Children's Hospital. I'm hosting it." She hesitated, searching his face for any sign of interest. "Will you be able to attend?" He barely looked at her as he loosened his tie. "I don't know," he muttered. "I might have to be out of town." She set down the magazine in her hands, her stomach twisting. "Out of town again?" she asked, her voice measured. "Where this time?" His gaze snapped to her, sharp and defensive. "I have to finalize details on an overseas investment," he said. "That's all." The finality in his tone was clear. He was shutting the conversation down. Evelyn felt a flicker of frustration, but she kept her voice calm. "You've been traveling a lot lately. London, Chicago, even right here in New York. Hotels. Are you sure all these business trips are necessary?" Nathaniel turned fully to face her now, his expression cold. "You're prying," he said flatly. "Is that what marriage is now? Me having to justify every minute of my day?" She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "It's not prying," she said carefully. "It's wanting my husband to be present during our pregnancy. I've gone to every doctor's appointment alone. The baby will be here in a few weeks." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "Don't you want to be here for us?" For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, but it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by stubborn defensiveness. "I'm building a future, Evelyn," he said, his jaw tightening. "A future that includes this child. Or do you think money just appears out of thin air? If I don't handle these deals, our entire lifestyle could collapse." She felt her chin tremble, but she refused to cry. Instead, she forced herself to hold his gaze. "You've changed," she whispered. "I don't even know when it started, but you're not the same man anymore." Nathaniel stared at her in silence, a dozen sharp responses dying on his lips. Then, without another word, he turned and strode toward his study, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the living room, numb from the growing distance between them. Once inside, Nathaniel sank into the leather chair behind his massive mahogany desk. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass window, but his own reflection glared back at him, a man caught between two lives: Helena's intoxicating pull, Evelyn's unwavering devotion, the unborn child he had barely acknowledged. He pushed the thoughts aside, unwilling to let them sink too deep. He felt cornered, suffocated by the very choices he had made. Meanwhile, back in the living room, Evelyn's phone vibrated against the coffee table. A text from an unknown number. She picked up the device, her brow furrowing as she read the message. "I have information about your husband. We need to talk. Anthony Romano." Evelyn's pulse quickened. The name wasn't familiar, but the tone was urgent. Something inside her stirred, a mix of dread and determination, and for the first time, she felt that the truth was closer than she had ever imagined. Evelyn opened the message, her pulse quickening. She had no idea that in doing so, she was about to unravel the carefully constructed walls of Nathaniel's double life. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Evelyn slipped into a quiet downtown cafe, her dark coat pulled tightly around her. A loosely draped scarf shielded part of her face, though she wasn't sure if she was hiding from the world or from the truth she was about to face. In a booth near the window sat a young man in a crisp bellhop uniform. The name tag pinned to his chest read Anthony Romano. His hands fidgeted around his coffee cup, stirring absent-mindedly. When she approached, he quickly stood, his expression uncertain but respectful. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said hesitantly, "it's an honor to meet you." "Please," she murmured, slipping into the seat across from him. "Just call me Evelyn." Anthony nodded, casting a cautious glance over his shoulder, as if afraid someone might be listening. I don't know how to say this," he began, his voice uneasy, "but I saw your husband at the Belmere Hotel." His fingers tightened around the ceramic mug. He's been visiting a suite on the top floor, multiple times. He hesitated before adding, I recognized him from the charity gala last year, but he wasn't with you. Evelyn felt the color drain from her face. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to remain composed. You're absolutely certain it was him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Anthony exhaled sharply and reached into his pocket. Pulling out his phone, he tapped the screen and turned it toward her. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking it. Nathaniel, stepping out of an elevator, beside a woman with flowing brunette waves and piercing green eyes. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as a sharp pain spread through her chest. Her fingers curled into a fist. Why are you showing me this? She finally asked. She wasn't accusing him, just trying to understand. Anthony's gaze flickered with something close to guilt. My mom works in housekeeping at the Belmere, he admitted. She had some issues with management there. They treated her unfairly, and she's a big fan of yours. She volunteers at the same women's shelter you fund. His voice softened. I felt like you should know the truth. Evelyn's heart pounded against her ribs. This woman. She already knew the name before Anthony said it. I overheard her introduce herself, he continued. Her name is Helena Rousseau. Evelyn closed her eyes, and the name echoed like a siren in her mind. Helena. Betrayal slashed through her, searing and raw. Humiliation twisted in her stomach. But above all, a fierce maternal protectiveness for her unborn child roared inside her. She inhaled shakily, pushing down the burning in her throat. Thank you, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I know this wasn't easy for you. Anthony nodded, relief and concern flickering across his face. I just hope you can do something about it. You don't deserve this. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a discreet envelope, pressing it into his hand. I appreciate your honesty, she said softly. Please take this. Anthony hesitated, but when she insisted, he eventually accepted it with a grateful nod. Before he could leave, she reached out and gently touched his arm. You've done me a kindness, she whispered. Thank you. As Anthony walked away, Evelyn sat frozen in place, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Outside, the city moved on. Cars honked, pedestrians rushed past. The world continued as if nothing had changed. But for Evelyn, everything had. She stepped out into the cold air, clutching her coat as though it could shield her from the storm brewing inside her. And for the first time since marrying her billionaire husband, she realized the life she thought she had was nothing more than a beautifully spun lie. Each step Evelyn took felt heavier than the last. The image of Nathaniel with another woman, so brazen, so deceitful, played on an endless loop in her mind. Despite the heartbreak clawing at her, a flicker of defiance burned within. She was Evelyn Whitmore, daughter of Charles Kensington. A woman raised to navigate the corridors of power and influence. She thought of the baby growing inside her, of her father's empire, of the philanthropic networks she had built on her own. I will not break. She whispered the vow to herself, pressing a protective hand against her stomach. Instead of crumbling, she would gather evidence, strategize, and protect her child at all costs. The morning after her clandestine meeting with Anthony Romano, Evelyn made an appointment with her father's longtime legal counsel, Margaret Cho. Margaret, a formidable attorney in her late 50s, was known for her no-nonsense approach and unwavering loyalty to the Kensington family. She greeted Evelyn with a warm but serious expression at a discreet law office near Central Park. Evelyn, darling, come in, Margaret said, concern etched on her face. Once the office door closed, Evelyn pulled out her phone and opened the photo gallery. As Margaret flipped through the damning images, her expression darkened. This is serious, Margaret stated, tapping the screen. An affair, especially given the timing with your pregnancy, could be grounds for significant legal action. She met Evelyn's gaze. Are you certain you want to go down this road? Evelyn swallowed, her throat tight, but her voice steady. Nathaniel made vows, to me and to our unborn child. He's broken them. I won't act recklessly, but I need to protect myself and the baby. I don't know if I want a divorce, she admitted, but I want to know my rights. Margaret nodded, pulling the set of documents from her briefcase. Your prenuptial agreement contains specific clauses regarding infidelity, financial misconduct, and abandonment. If we gather solid evidence, we can secure substantial financial holdings for both you and your child. Margaret paused. But Evelyn, you need to understand. These fights get ugly. Are you prepared for that? Evelyn's lips pressed into a determined line. I am prepared to defend my child's future. I'm not looking to destroy Nathaniel, but I won't let him or that woman destroy us either. Margaret squeezed her hand in solidarity. Then we move carefully. Start collecting any proof, financial transactions, phone records, sightings. I'll quietly initiate an audit of Nathaniel's assets to see if he's diverting funds toward this mistress. Once we know the scale of his deception, we'll decide on the next steps. Evelyn left Margaret's office with a heavy heart, but a newfound determination. The pain of betrayal still clenched in her stomach, but the spark of anger fueling her resolve burned brighter. She had been naive once. She wouldn't make the same mistake again. Meanwhile, Nathaniel remained oblivious. Too consumed by Helena's demands for extravagant European trips, and too distracted by Evelyn's sudden aloofness at home, he failed to realize the quiet war brewing against him. Their dinners had grown silent, but he had no idea that his pregnant wife was preparing for battle. Their evenings had grown painfully silent. When Nathaniel bothered to come home, he would attempt small talk, but Evelyn's responses were clipped and distant, not angry, just indifferent. And somehow, that stung more than outright hostility. He told himself she was just exhausted from the pregnancy, overwhelmed by her commitments to the Kensington Foundation. Helena, on the other hand, was growing impatient. She insisted Nathaniel attend an upcoming art exhibition at her gallery, an event that would cement their relationship in the eyes of Manhattan's elite. He refused. Public outings were too risky, gossip columns thrived on whispers, and he couldn't afford a scandal. Helena pouted, and for the first time, the tension between them flared into something more than just desire. The tides were shifting, but Nathaniel remained blind to their direction. He still believed he had control over his empire, over his marriage, over his affair. But no fortress, no matter how fortified, can withstand the collision of betrayal and retribution. The unraveling began at a charity gala Evelyn co-chaired for the Kensington Women's Shelter. It was held in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, where chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, and polished marble floors reflected the power and privilege of Manhattan's elite. Politicians, celebrities, CEOs, anyone who was anyone was there. Evelyn stood poised in an emerald silk gown, greeting guests with a gracious smile, masking the storm brewing inside. She caught sight of her father, Charles Kensington, sipping a martini near the silent auction table. He gave her a discreet nod of support, but his gaze held something more: concern. And then she saw him. Nathaniel arrived an hour late, his signature smirk in place, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, but his eyes never met hers. A strange unease crept up her spine. And then, as if fate itself was testing her, Evelyn saw her. Helena Rousseau, dripping in a silver gown, effortlessly radiant. She had secured an invitation by donating a rare painting to the auction. But Evelyn knew better. Helena wasn't here for charity. The room hummed with whispers. Nathaniel and Helena's stolen glances weren't subtle. Their chemistry was undeniable, too intimate for two supposed acquaintances. Evelyn kept her composure, smiling, nodding, playing the perfect hostess, though each hushed conversation around her felt like a knife to the ribs. Helena, as if sensing victory, didn't hold back. She drifted to Nathaniel's side, her laughter too bright, her touches too lingering. From across the room, Alyssa Carter, Nathaniel's assistant, observed the scene unfold. She had been watching, waiting, knowing too much but powerless to intervene. She approached Evelyn, offering a subtle touch to her arm. "I'm here if you need me," she whispered. Evelyn mustered a tight smile. She needed no rescuing. When the time came for her keynote speech, she took the stage. Her voice was smooth, unwavering, a speech on women's empowerment and the importance of safe spaces. But every sentence carried a sharpened edge, each word dipped in steel: respect, protection, honor. She wasn't just speaking to the crowd, she was speaking to the man who was supposed to be her rock. Then, mid-speech, she saw them. Nathaniel and Helena, tucked into a corner, whispering. Something inside her cracked. Fury surged through her veins, hot and unrelenting. But Evelyn Whitmore didn't crumble. She finished her speech, her applause thunderous. And as she stepped off stage, she had one goal in mind: This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about war. Helena brushed past her, elbowing Evelyn's pregnant belly ever so slightly. Accidental? Perhaps, or perhaps not. A sharp pain shot through her abdomen, and Evelyn gasped, clutching her stomach. Nathaniel's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing with urgency, but not for her. "Evelyn, watch where you're going," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut. Gasps rippled through the room. A hush fell over the grand ballroom. Helena smirked behind him, her crimson lips curving in silent victory. Evelyn's breath hitched. She couldn't even form words, her mind reeling. The humiliation, the betrayal, all of it unfurled under the unforgiving gaze of Manhattan's elite. And then, the cameras flashed. The illusion of Nathaniel Whitmore, the devoted husband, the perfect businessman, was cracking right before their eyes. Evelyn didn't wait for the whispers to consume her. She turned and fled, her heels clicking against the polished marble as she rushed off stage, heart pounding. The baby. She wrapped protective arms around her stomach, fear clawing at her chest. She needed air. The grand corridor leading to the hotel lobby was her only escape, but before she could reach the double doors, hurried footsteps sounded behind her. She spun around, only to find Nathaniel, stalking toward her. His expression was twisted with anger. Behind him, guests lingered, torn between curiosity and discomfort, their eyes darting toward the scene unfolding. "What the hell was that back there?" Nathaniel demanded, his voice low, edged with fury. Evelyn's hands trembled, but not with fear, with rage. "What was that scene?" she echoed, her voice shaking with barely contained emotion. "I was giving a speech, raising money for abused and homeless women, while you were cozying up to her." Her voice broke, but she refused to falter. "And now you're blaming me." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but controlled. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. But it was too late. The eyes of New York's most powerful were already fixed on them. Evelyn yanked her arm free, ignoring the sting of his fingers. "It's you who's making a spectacle," she shot back, her voice trembling with both fury and heartbreak. "How dare you show up here with her?" The tension between them crackled. Then, a third presence joined them, Helena Rousseau. With the audacity of a woman who believed herself untouchable, she glided forward, her silver dress shimmering under the chandeliers. "Oh, Nathaniel, darling," she crooned, her tone dripping with false concern. "Is everything all right?" Evelyn's entire body went rigid. Helena's smirk was subtle, but it was there, a quiet enjoyment of the chaos she had orchestrated. Evelyn felt the heat of unshed tears sting her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. She lifted her chin, her voice steel. "You have no right," she said, her tone cutting. "Don't you dare call him darling in front of me." The crowd had edged closer, the tension palpable. Phones were angled discreetly, peeking out from behind clutches, hidden at people's sides. The confrontation was no longer private. It was turning into a spectacle. And for the first time, Evelyn knew. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was war. Charles Kensington appeared behind the growing crowd, his face pale with shock. His eyes darted across the scene, Evelyn standing frozen, her cheek red, Nathaniel's hands still hovering midair, and the stunned silence of Manhattan's most elite guests. Panic surged through him. He pushed forward, desperate to reach his daughter. Nathaniel, feeling cornered, lashed out. "Stop acting like a victim, Evelyn," he snapped, his voice thick with fury. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the deals I have to make." Helena stood beside him, her expression shifting from smug satisfaction to unease. Nathaniel continued, his words sharp, his ego unraveling. "Helena is." But whatever excuse he had prepared was lost in the haze of his own rage. Evelyn's voice sliced through him. "I understand perfectly," she said, her chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion. "I understand that you're a liar and a cheat." Something inside Nathaniel snapped. His hand flew out before he even registered the action. A sharp crack rang out as his palm connected with Evelyn's cheek. The sound shattered the grand hotel lobby, ricocheting off the marble walls. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing the exact moment Manhattan's golden billionaire destroyed his carefully curated image. Evelyn stumbled, a sharp sting blooming across her face. Her hand shot up to her burning cheek, her vision blurred, but she didn't fall. She wouldn't fall. Helena's lips parted in shock, her confidence cracking for the first time. Charles finally broke through the crowd, his roar of outrage filling the space. In that single, violent moment, Nathaniel had obliterated everything. His power, his reputation, his marriage. Evelyn's entire world had just imploded. For a second, the grand chandeliers above seemed frozen, as if even the universe itself was stunned into silence. Evelyn's breathing was uneven, her mind screaming with one singular thought: the baby. She cradled her stomach protectively, her pulse hammering. Charles was the first to react. He shoved Nathaniel hard, his voice shaking with undiluted rage. "Have you lost your damn mind?" Charles bellowed, his voice booming through the marble foyer. "That's my daughter." His voice trembled with fury, his fists clenched. "You pathetic excuse for a man." The crowd parted. Some guests rushed to Evelyn's side, others hesitated, caught between horror and the temptation to capture the moment on their phones. A security guard hovered nearby, uncertain whether to step in or let the public scandal unfold. Nathaniel stood frozen, his face twisted in shock, his own actions catching up to him. His chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through his veins. She provoked me," he started, his voice weak. But even he didn't believe the words. The murmurs of the crowd turned sharp. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her body trembling, but when she lifted her head, her gaze was ice. She pressed a hand against her stinging cheek, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and lethal. "You dare lay a hand on me?" she said, each word razor-sharp. "On your pregnant wife?" A fresh wave of whispers spread through the lobby. Nathaniel had crossed a line no apology could erase. Helena inched away, her confidence unraveling. For the first time, she seemed to regret being caught in the blast radius. Charles turned his fury toward her, his eyes dark with unforgiving rage. "And you," he spat, voice dripping with contempt. "I don't know who you think you are, but don't you dare step near my daughter again." Helena took another step back, because in that moment she finally realized this was the beginning of Nathaniel Whitmore's downfall. Nathaniel's face twisted in fury. "Again?" he snarled, taking a step forward. Helena shrank back, her confidence evaporating in an instant. She grabbed her clutch and disappeared into the crowd, which parted for her as if she were a storm leaving destruction in her wake. Before Nathaniel could react, Charles Kensington's voice thundered. "Call an ambulance!" He barked at the nearest security guard. "My daughter is pregnant." The guard rushed to comply, but Evelyn, though trembling, straightened her spine. "I don't need an ambulance," she said, her voice quavering but unbroken. "I just need to get away from him." Charles placed a steady hand on her back, guiding her toward the exit. The moment they stepped outside, the paparazzi descended like vultures, their cameras exploding in flashes of white light. The world was watching. And Evelyn Whitmore, tear-streaked and shaking, became the center of the biggest scandal in Manhattan. Nathaniel stumbled after them, his desperation breaking through the icy arrogance that had once defined him. "Evelyn," he shouted, "don't walk away, let's just talk." She turned, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare come near me." Her voice carried the finality of a slamming door. She stepped into the waiting limousine, Charles close behind her. The door shut with a decisive thud, and the vehicle sped into the neon-lit Manhattan night. Nathaniel stood there, alone, disoriented, as the cameras continued flashing, capturing the exact moment his empire began to crumble. Within minutes, social media erupted. Billionaire Nathaniel Whitmore slaps pregnant wife at charity event. Mistress involved. Every shred of doubt, every ounce of sympathy vanished under the avalanche of condemnation. And as the city buzzed with scandal, Evelyn made a silent vow. She would never again allow this man to harm her or her child. 2 days later, Evelyn was secluded in her father's Upper East Side penthouse, shielded from the relentless press by private security. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the city lights glittering like a world still moving on. But inside, Evelyn felt only chaos. Margaret Cho had arrived earlier that evening, her expression grim yet determined, legal documents in hand. Charles insisted on pressing assault charges against Nathaniel, or at the very least, filing a restraining order. But Evelyn wasn't ready to decide. Her emotions warred within her, betrayal, rage, heartbreak, each one demanding a different course of action. As Margaret spoke quietly with Charles in the living room, Evelyn's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice came through the line, shaky but determined. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's Alyssa Carter." Evelyn's stomach twisted. Alyssa, Nathaniel's longtime assistant. I'm so sorry about everything, Alyssa began, her voice laced with guilt. I had to gather the courage to call you. Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. Alyssa, she whispered, just tell me. Alyssa exhaled shakily. I've worked for Nathaniel for years. I stayed loyal because, well, he was good to me once, but after what he did, she hesitated. And then, in a voice heavy with truth, she said, there's something you need to know. Alyssa's voice trembled with disgust. I can't stay silent anymore, she said. I found a series of emails and documents on Nathaniel's computer. Helena isn't just his mistress. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She's been using him, Alyssa continued, her tone urgent. She convinced him to funnel money into offshore accounts, promising to invest in European expansions. But it's all a front, a cover for a money laundering scheme. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, nausea churning in her stomach. Are you sure? She whispered. Positive, Alyssa said firmly. I have the documents, huge wire transfers, and they're not just from Nathaniel. Some of the money was pulled from Whitmore Global's philanthropic funds. Evelyn's free hand went to her belly, her mind racing. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was fraud. This was criminal. Alyssa's voice softened. I'm sending the files to Margaret Cho. She can use them to protect you legally. Then she hesitated. And there's more. Evelyn gripped the phone tighter. What? I overheard Nathaniel's phone call with Helena last night, Alyssa confessed. He was furious, blaming her for the public scandal. Evelyn closed her eyes, her pulse pounding. She threatened him, Alyssa continued, said if he tried to cut ties, she'd expose him. We're talking blackmail, Evelyn. A shiver ran down her spine. She had braced herself for betrayal. But this was so much worse. Alyssa's voice softened. I know this is a lot to take in, but you needed to know the truth. Evelyn swallowed hard. You did the right thing, Alyssa. Thank you. After hanging up, Evelyn immediately summoned Margaret Cho. The attorney listened carefully, her sharp eyes narrowing as she scanned through the evidence Alyssa had forwarded. This changes everything, Margaret said. Nathaniel isn't just facing assault charges. If these documents hold up, he could be implicated in criminal financial misconduct. And Helena? She's just as guilty. Evelyn's chest tightened, a mix of anxiety and resolve swirling within her. If you file for divorce, this evidence could secure a substantial settlement, Margaret continued. And more importantly, it could protect your father's name from this scandal. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Nathaniel had shattered their marriage with betrayal and violence. But now, she held the power to shatter his world, and she had to decide how to use it. Across the city, inside his penthouse, Nathaniel paced like a caged predator. The aftershocks of his public downfall had hit hard. Whitmore Global's stock was plummeting. Board members bombarded him with frantic messages. He had ignored every call, from the media, from his father-in-law, even from his own mother. The only person he had spoken to was Helena Rousseau. And now, she was demanding hush money. The previous night's phone call had been venomous. You don't get to walk away from me, Nathaniel, she had hissed. If I go down, I'll take you with me. I have records of every transaction, every wire transfer. His response had been immediate, furious. Don't threaten me, he had roared. I can bury you. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew. His bravado was hollow, because for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Whitmore was losing control. Nathaniel was in free fall, and Helena knew it. She had played him perfectly, stroking his ego while quietly orchestrating her scheme. Now, she wanted hush money, and she wanted it fast. The amount was staggering, far more than he could discreetly pull from Whitmore Global's accounts without raising alarms. Alone in his disheveled office, Nathaniel slammed his fist onto his desk. Documents scattered, one landing face up, the bold, black headline of a tabloid screaming at him. Billionaire Nathaniel Whitmore exposed. Public outrage after violence against pregnant wife. His stomach twisted. Beneath the headline, a photograph captured the exact moment his palm had met Evelyn's cheek. The evidence of his downfall, printed for the world to see. Panic clawed at him. Desperate, he dialed Evelyn's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried Charles Kensington next. No answer. Even Alyssa Carter had turned against him, vanishing from Whitmore Global's hallways, leaving him without a single ally. The walls of his empire were closing in. He sank into his chair and poured himself a generous glass of whiskey, ignoring the early hour. He had never wanted to hurt Evelyn, not physically. It was a moment of madness, not who he really was. But even as he told himself that, guilt gnawed at him, feeding nightmares of losing everything: his business, his child, his name. A notification pinged on his phone. He lifted it with unsteady hands. An email from Margaret Cho, subject: legal proceedings. Nathaniel's chest tightened. With shaking fingers, he opened it. As he read, his face drained of color. Evelyn had filed for a protective order. She cited domestic abuse, requesting an immediate restriction preventing him from contacting her or coming near their unborn child. But the final blow came in the last paragraph. Certain Whitmore global assets would be frozen, pending an investigation into fraudulent financial activities. His heart pounded violently. They knew everything: the money laundering, his complicity with Helena, the lies he told himself, that he could control everything, were finally unraveling. He wanted to lash out, to blame someone else. But deep down he knew this was his own doing. He turned to the window, staring at the city below, the very city he once believed he owned. The reckoning had begun. And unless he acted fast, the man once hailed as the Golden King of Wall Street would be reduced to ashes. Across the city, inside Charles Kensington's Upper East Side penthouse, Evelyn felt strangely calm. Margaret Cho had just left, after outlining the next legal steps. The protective order would be filed immediately, ensuring Nathaniel couldn't come near her or their unborn child. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt safe. And soon, she would feel free. Legal action was inevitable. Divorce papers, citing domestic violence and adultery, were already being prepared. Meanwhile, the financial probe into Whitmore Global's suspicious dealings with Helena Rousseau had begun. Sitting by the grand floor-to-ceiling window, Evelyn found herself absent-mindedly stroking her belly. She was no longer the naive wife who once believed in saving a broken marriage. She had been forced to confront Nathaniel's betrayal in the most brutal way possible. Now, only fierce determination remained. A knock at the door startled her. She turned to see Charles Kensington enter, his usual stoic expression lined with concern. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Evelyn managed a small smile. "Better than I expected." "The bruises are healing," she said, "and the baby is fine. The doctor confirmed it this morning." Charles let out a slow breath. "I'm relieved, but I know this must still be overwhelming." She nodded, gazing at the New York skyline beyond the glass. "I never thought I'd be here," she murmured. "Married to a man who would cheat, then strike me when confronted." Her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind every word. "I can't dwell on the pain. I have to do what's right for me and the baby." Charles hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There's something you should know." Evelyn turned to him, eyes questioning. "I made some calls to friends in the district attorney's office," he said. Her breath caught. "If Nathaniel's finances are tied to illegal activities, there may be criminal charges. And if he tries to claim you provoked him, rest assured, we have multiple witness statements from the gala." A flicker of relief crossed Evelyn's face. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. "I appreciate you standing by me, despite everything." Charles placed a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're strong, Evelyn," he said. "Stronger than you realize, and you'll get through this." She exhaled deeply, leaning into her father's embrace. Nathaniel Whitmore had once been the charming man who made her laugh. Now, that memory felt like a bitter dream. Over the next few hours, Evelyn took control of her life. She wrote personal letters to a handful of close friends, explaining that she was safe but needed space. She made phone calls to philanthropic committees, delegating responsibilities for upcoming fundraisers. And when she reached out to the women's shelter she co-chaired, their response was immediate and unwavering. "Whatever you need, we're here." That support strengthened her resolve. She was no longer defined by being Nathaniel Whitmore's wife. She was a mother-to-be, a philanthropist, a woman determined to reclaim her dignity. Each small step forward lifted her out of despair. And though she suspected a final confrontation with Nathaniel loomed, she felt no fear. Only readiness. Because the man who tried to break her was about to learn. The fiercest storms are born in silence. Some people are broken by storms. Others learn to command them. 48 hours after Margaret's email landed in his inbox, Nathaniel Whitmore stood outside Charles Kensington's penthouse, flanked by 2 lawyers he had hastily hired. The doorman eyed him warily, fully aware of the scandal that had gripped the city. Still, he let him in. The meeting had been scheduled through Margaret Cho's firm. Inside, the luxurious penthouse living room was cast in subdued lamplight, its usual warmth replaced by an icy stillness. Seated on a velvet couch, her posture regal despite her advanced pregnancy, Evelyn Whitmore waited. The faint yellowing mark on her cheek had nearly faded. But the memory of Nathaniel's slap burned fresh in her eyes. Nathaniel's lawyers murmured rushed greetings, their politeness strained. Margaret's tone was crisp as she led them toward the dining table, where legal documents lay in neat stacks. "We're here to finalize the protective order, discuss the pending divorce, and address the allegations of financial misconduct." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "Allegations," he repeated bitterly. "Not proven." Margaret tapped a thick folder. "These are financial records from Whitmore Global, showing money funneled into Helena Rousseau's shell companies." She opened another file. "We also have her bank statements, linking those transactions to offshore accounts in the Caymans." Nathaniel's face paled. "This is a misunderstanding," he said stiffly. "She told me it was for expansion into Europe." For the first time, Evelyn spoke. Her voice was calm, steady. "And you took money from philanthropic accounts?" Nathaniel flinched. "Money meant to help people, all for her? Or for your ego?" A flicker of guilt passed through his eyes. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "you have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you." She met his gaze, unyielding. "And yet you did." Nathaniel's lawyers shifted uncomfortably, then took over. "We propose a private settlement and a gag order," one of them said smoothly. "In return, Mr. Whitmore will cede a percentage of assets." Evelyn lifted a hand. "No." Her voice was unwavering. "You lost the right to silence this. I've already filed for divorce. There will be no secrecy." Her eyes locked onto Nathaniel's, a quiet fire burning behind them. Women, especially pregnant women, need to see that abusers don't get to hide behind wealth. Nathaniel exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his own downfall. "So this is it," he murmured. Evelyn took a steady breath. "There's one more thing you should know." Nathaniel's head snapped up. "You accused me of provoking you. You tried to justify hitting me." She glanced at her father. Charles gave a slow, measured nod. A hush fell over the room. Evelyn squared her shoulders, and then, in a voice quiet but unshakable, she said, "There's a secret I've been keeping." Evelyn took a steady breath, her voice unwavering. "Nathaniel, the baby I'm carrying has a serious medical condition." She felt her father's presence beside her, a silent pillar of strength. "I only found out after a recent test," she continued. "He'll need specialized care after birth, possibly surgeries." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't falter. "All the money you threw away on Helena." Her voice broke, but she pushed forward. "That was money our child desperately needed." Nathaniel staggered back, his complexion ashen. I didn't know," he whispered, his gaze flickering to her stomach, as if seeing her pregnancy for the first time. Shock rippled through his features. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about his empire, his reputation, or his downfall. For the first time, he understood what he had truly lost. Silence suffocated the room. Margaret's sharp gaze hardened. Any sympathy the courts might have had for Nathaniel would be obliterated by this revelation. And for Evelyn, a sense of closure bloomed. Her heartbreak, her child's struggle, Nathaniel's callous greed, it was all laid bare. No matter what came next, he could never escape the truth. The legal fallout was swift and devastating. Evelyn's attorneys used every shred of evidence, with Alyssa Carter's testimony solidifying Nathaniel's involvement in Helena's fraudulent schemes. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office launched an investigation, eyeing potential criminal charges. Helena, realizing the game was over, fled the country, abandoning Nathaniel to face the consequences alone. Whitmore Global's board of directors voted him out as CEO. Its once flawless reputation crumbled. The company's stock plummeted. A civil lawsuit awaited him. Evelyn demanding damages for assault and the misuse of philanthropic funds. Public sympathy overwhelmingly sided with the pregnant wife who had been betrayed and battered by the man once hailed as a Wall Street king. But through the chaos, Evelyn found hope. She focused on ensuring her unborn child received the best medical care possible. Her father's network of specialists and donors rallied behind her, raising funds and awareness for children with similar conditions. Evelyn stood at the forefront of the movement, turning her pain into purpose. No longer was she just Nathaniel Whitmore's wife. She was a mother-to-be, a philanthropist, and a force of resilience. Charles Kensington watched his daughter with pride. The quiet, poised socialite was gone. In her place stood a woman of unshakable strength. Together, they redesigned a portion of the Kensington Foundation, dedicating it to pediatric medical care, named in honor of Evelyn's unborn child. On a crisp autumn morning, Evelyn gave birth to a baby boy. Though he required immediate medical intervention, the doctors were optimistic. Margaret Cho visited Evelyn at the hospital, placing a final set of documents in her hands. The divorce proceedings were complete, and with that signature, Evelyn closed the last chapter of her life with Nathaniel Whitmore, and stepped fully into the life she was meant to lead. A judge ruled in Evelyn's favor, granting her full custody of her son and freezing Nathaniel's personal assets until the criminal investigation concluded. Standing beside the newborn's hospital bassinet, Evelyn took a steady breath and signed her name. She had won. Days later, as she was wheeled out of the hospital, photographers lurked nearby, their cameras flashing. Security kept them at a respectful distance, but Evelyn made no effort to hide. Instead, she held her son close, letting the world see not a broken woman, but a mother reborn in strength. The next day's headlines told two starkly different stories. Evelyn Whitmore leaves hospital triumphant. Son thrives after medical intervention. Nathaniel Whitmore's empire collapses. Former CEO faces criminal charges. The contrast was undeniable. Some days later, a subdued Alyssa Carter arrived at Charles Kensington's penthouse, her expression filled with guilt. "I should have spoken up sooner," she murmured. But Evelyn only gave her a grateful smile. "You came forward when it mattered," she said. "That's what counts." Alyssa placed a neatly wrapped box on the table. "A few of us from Whitmore Global wanted to send something," she explained. Inside were baby gifts, a quiet acknowledgement from the employees who had once worked under Nathaniel's iron rule but had now turned their backs on him. It was a small thing, but it brought Evelyn a sense of closure. As for Nathaniel, the future he had once commanded now lay in ruin. Legal battles, financial devastation, the loneliness of a man who had finally realized the cost of his choices. Helena Rousseau never returned for him. She had taken everything she could and disappeared, leaving him to drown in the wreckage of his own making. The city, once captivated by his wealth and power, now spoke his name only in whispers of scandal and disgrace. But Evelyn? She stepped into a new beginning. With her son in her arms and her father by her side, she embraced motherhood and advocacy, her scars a testament to her survival. She was no longer a victim, but a warrior, a woman who had reclaimed her life and ensured that her child's future would be built on love, not betrayal. And so the story of Nathaniel Whitmore and Evelyn Kensington came to its inevitable end. A tale of betrayal, violence, and unchecked ambition. But from the ruins of a broken marriage, a stronger woman emerged, one who would fight for her child, one who would stand for those who had been wronged. Evelyn's calm yet resolute stance sent a powerful message. True strength lies in standing up against abuse, defying the odds, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. And as Nathaniel faced the full force of his downfall, Evelyn stepped forward, with the courage born of heartbreak and the unwavering love of a mother. 3 years later, the world had changed, but Evelyn Whitmore had never felt stronger. Standing on the balcony of her New York townhouse, she watched as the city hummed with life beneath her. 3 years ago, she had left the hospital as a pregnant wife turned survivor. Today, she stood as a mother, an advocate, and a woman who had reclaimed her own power. Her son, Oliver, was playing inside, his laughter filling the air, a sound that reminded her of how far they had come. His medical condition had required surgeries and specialized care, but he was thriving. With each milestone he reached, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. Whitmore Global no longer belonged to Nathaniel. After his downfall, the company had undergone a complete transformation, shifting away from corporate greed to true philanthropy. Under new leadership, it now funded medical research for children with rare conditions, a mission Evelyn had helped guide. And Nathaniel Whitmore? His name had faded from the front pages of newspapers, replaced by new scandals, new tycoons, new stories. After losing everything, his fortune, his influence, his power, he had disappeared from high society. Some whispered that he had fled to Europe, while others claimed he was trying to rebuild a life in silence. Evelyn did not care. Her victory was never about his defeat. It was about her own rebirth. She had built something greater from the ashes of her past. The Kensington Foundation for Pediatric Care, named in honor of her son, had expanded nationwide, helping thousands of families. Her work had taken her across the country, speaking at conferences, advocating for women and children, and proving that even the darkest chapters could lead to new beginnings. Charles Kensington stood beside her, watching Oliver chase a butterfly across the grass. "You did it, Evelyn," he said quietly. She turned to him, a knowing smile on her lips. "No," she said. "We did it." As the sun dipped behind the skyline, she felt peace. Not because life had been easy, not because pain had never existed, but because she had taken that pain and turned it into power. And for the first time in years, she knew she was finally free. Dear friend, so the story has come to an end. But you're still here, aren't you? That tells me this story touched your heart in some way. Maybe you have seen someone go through this. Maybe you are listening to find meaning in your own life. And you might ask, why am I telling you this story? Because this is not just a story. This is real. It is happening right now, somewhere in the world. We have statistics, but behind every number, there is a real person. Someone suffering, someone trying to stand up, someone who needs to be reminded that they matter. And if there is one thing I want you to remember from this story, it is this. No matter what life throws at you, stand strong. The Stoics teach us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Seneca. Remember, true strength does not come from what we have, but from how we face life. How long will you wait before you demand the best for yourself? Epictetus. Don't wait for a miracle to change your life. You are the miracle. The only way to face life is to find joy in each moment. Marcus Aurelius. And you know what? A small action can have a big meaning. Click like to support this video. Click subscribe so you don't miss more powerful stories. With just one click, you help spread a message that someone out there needs to hear. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Remember, you deserve a strong and peaceful life. See you in the next story.